Hello chess fans, in today's video I want to share a game I played against an IM, and in this game we were both on a level playing field. We were playing 15 plus 10 and my opponent also had 15 plus 10, and it wasn't a simultaneous exhibition like my game against a GM. So my opponent started off with e4, and unfortunately for me this opponent knew what I usually do, so like either usually I would play c5 or c6 or something like that. But here, I decided to surprise my opponent with e6. And so I know already my opponent was not expecting this, and they were now probably, they weren't out of theory, obviously. They probably know this is the French defense, but they were out of like what they maybe have prepped for this game. So my opponent played d4, d5, knight c3. I hadn't really expected this, more so I'd expected knight d2. But I know that against knight c3, a pretty simple line to play is knight f6. And here after bishop g5, when I was a little bit lower rated and I was first learning openings, I remember I saw a video by somebody on bishop b4, and this is what I was going to go for if my opponent played bishop g5, but my opponent decided to play e5, which is another good line. I played knight fd7, f4, and the idea is that they want to get the knight behind the pawn, and so that when this pawn eventually like goes away because of c5, that this pawn will be defended. Another line they could play is knight f3, but then after c5 they have to take here. Otherwise, knight takes would lose a pawn. So f4 is the main line. I played c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3, and here I decided to go for a very tricky line. So the main moves here are c takes and a6, and both these moves are fine. A line that I think should not be played is queen b6 because it leads to forced piece sacrifice, and I knew basically all four of these lines, and these are the main lines of this position. But, I played the fourth line actually, the third line, which is bishop e7. And the idea is just simply to develop a piece. And now this is by no means the most critical test. Like, white is definitely better here. But what white has to know is after queen d2, castling, which is the main move, I think white here gets a very significant advantage with d takes c5. And then basically black has to either waste a tempo like this or take this way, which should be less ideal than taking with the bishops. But instead my opponent played, which I think is a very common blunder you see a lot in this variation, which is castles. And believe it or not, this position is already lost for white. And this is pretty much the only thing I knew. So I didn't even know that d takes at the time was the best move because I didn't really know the French. Now I know it a little better, but I still don't think I'll play the French again. But after castles, the move c4, and white is basically just getting attacked for free, and there's no way to stop this. So at this point during the game, my heart was beating really fast because I knew I was winning against this IM, and I knew I should be able to win this. But I also knew that actually there was a game between Maxime Bachir-Lagrave on the white side against a 2400 player on the black side, and Maxime, obviously being one of the strongest players in the world, actually managed to win this position as white, even though it's completely lost. So my opponent played g4, which is maybe a mistake. Maybe they should go for f5 first, but I mean, you would have to know f5 is the best move here to play it probably. So g4 looks pretty natural to me. And here, I challenge you to find the best move. There's pretty much one move that like clears black out for a significant advantage, and there's some other moves, but you really have to get into the idea of I need to attack my opponent. And I was happy also about attacking because I'm a really tactical and aggressive player. And my opponent, like I knew, likes to play more positionally, likes to play more solid, likes to grind out their opponent with something like the Ruy Lopez or something like that. So here, what I got to do was play the move b5, and this is a pawn sacrifice, but it's completely sound pawn sacrifice, and the engine even says that it shouldn't be sacrificed because opening the b file towards the king is simply too much. So my opponent took, which I think is the most human move. The problem is if you like go here or something, king b1 the engine likes, then I think after b4, like a5, a4, and b3, the position is just absolutely horrendous for white, and white's surely losing. So at least you might as well take a pawn for your troubles. So here I played rook b8. The whole idea, activating the rook. Opponent played knight d6. And here for a really long time, I was calculating one move, and that move was knight b6. And I thought this is the most natural move. I'm threatening both to take here, like this. I'm threatening knight a4. And the only thing I didn't like was that I'm blocking my rook. And because of this, I thought my opponent's best move was b3, basically to control the knight from both of these squares. And so here I probably have to grab the pawn. And here my opponent can't take this because then I have mate, check here, and mate. If you can't see that here, check here, check, and this should be made after queen b4, rook takes b4, something like that. So my opponent would have gone something like queen c3 to cover it with queen b2. And here I looked at this position for a long time, and I mean, seeing it from all the way out here, I couldn't really see anything. Now, the engine says this position is -4, which is it's believable, but like, I didn't really see any knockout blow. And what you're supposed to do here is do a slow build-up with a4, maybe a5, maybe bishop d7, rook c8. But I wanted to go for something more concrete, so I went for queen b6. But the problem with queen b6 is it gives a lot of the advantage away after the move my opponent played. My opponent played c3. And here my next move gave away pretty much all the advantage, and it's probably equal. So here what I should do is just take the knight, and then try to hop a knight into e4. Because this is an outpost for the knight, and there's pretty much no way to stop it. And I'd be constantly threatening things like here, after maybe a4, a5, something like this. I'd be threatening things like here. And this position is pretty much winning for black. It's almost -2. Instead, I played queen a6. And the idea was I just wanted my opponent to get his king on the b file to align with the rook. Because then I thought, okay, then this can't possibly be a bad idea, because I don't know if king b1 is the best move. But as it usually is, don't force a good move from your opponent. Even in previous positions, king b1 was the best move to play rook c1, rook c2. But I basically thought it was not a good move because it was getting to this pin. So after takes, knight f6, knight e4, I was thinking that I'm even threatening here because now there's a pin on the pawn. And here my opponent made a huge blunder. And I don't think many players would even consider this move probably. But I think my opponent basically didn't want to play king b1 and admit that queen a6 was a good move, which it wasn't. But my opponent played b4. And this is just a massive blunder. The position is actually now -10. So I'll give you a few seconds to see if you can find why this is such a big blunder and how to punish it. So if your tactical sense is just going off right now, it definitely should be. And you have to see that all black's pieces are pretty well placed. This bishop, this knight, this rook, they're all coordinated. And white's king is just pretty much with only one defender. So here, when your opponent has committed to these things, you have to think about sacrifices. Another thing to mention is that this move wouldn't cross most people's heads because as a general principle, when you're like a beginner or even a slightly advanced player, you're taught don't move pawns in front of your king. That'll make your king weak. And here my opponent probably thought that this is a fine move because obviously I can't do en passant because then I lose my queen. And obviously I can't take here. So here I took this one, and for a long time actually I calculated this. And after c takes, I didn't see any move. I was thinking just I would have to go like queen c6 or queen a4 or maybe knight b6 or maybe even queen b5 to attack the pawn. And I was like, okay, wait, I just sacrificed the piece and I don't see anything concrete. But here actually black can just win the piece back immediately with queen a3. And there's pretty much no way to save this bishop on e3. If you go king c2, we can check here. King c1, go here. Pick up the a2 pawn and then go rook b2 and it's probably mate. And the best move according to the engine is king b2, but this just gives away this. And yeah, black is surely winning here. They even got their piece back. But instead I played queen b5, which is a huge blunder. But I mean, I think it's pretty much okay to make these type of blunders because first of all, I'm still winning and I was really nervous. And the idea with queen b5 is I wanted to play a5 to break up the structure. I did consider this move for a long time, but I only saw it one move after. So here what my opponent has to do is queen b2, a5, a3, knight f6 to go to e4, similar idea as we saw before. And after something like bishop d7, the rook's double on the a file, the position should be completely winning for black, but it's still very complicated. Instead, my opponent played queen c2, pretty much proving that they didn't see the idea from before, and they still didn't see it now. And now finally I sacked because now it looked a lot more clear cut, even though in the previous position it was -10. Here it's only -3. So I took, and yeah, it's pretty much impossible to defend for my opponent. Right now I have a threat, and that threat is to play check and pick up this. Now if you move the bishop, for example, if you go here, I think the simplest way to win is to go knight f6, knight e4, and then go queen a3 check. Maybe even simpler is go queen e3 check here and then just win the queen. So they can't really do that. So they had to play rook e1. So that after takes, they have this square as well, because then they don't have to meet this. So that they don't have to deal with this pin. So I played queen f3 check anyways, king d1, and here I played rook b2 anyways. And basically there's pretty much no defense here for white. For a long time, actually, I was considering this move queen c1, and my opponent actually ended up playing it. It's a blunder, but we'll get over that in a second. The best move is to go with bishop c1 here, but I can understandably see why my opponent didn't play this, because after takes, bishop e2, rook takes c2, rook takes here, and rook takes here. They're down 2 pawns at the moment, but they're about to lose a third one after this, and, well, I can imagine that my opponent didn't want to be down 3 pawns. So instead, my opponent played queen c1, and to anybody who's low rated or anything like that, this should be one that you can solve that I wasn't able to solve. Both me and an IM missed this, and I think your regular, maybe even 600 rated player would have probably saw this move. But let's see if you guys can find the best move here for black. I won't say if it's checkmate, if it's winning material, or whatever it's doing, but it basically just ends the game on the spot, and I missed it. So if you weren't able to find it, I recommend pausing. It's not very difficult and it's not a very common motion or like thing to happen in chess, but it's pretty bad that I missed this. The best move is just queen a4 check, and basically they're in zigzag because all their pieces are on the back rank, and this is blocking the king. So the only move here is queen c2, and after queen x c2, it's mate. Now, actually, I took on a2, and then I just went back a move for a second because I was like, wait, wasn't there something better? And after queen c1, I was like, wait, I had queen a4 check. And so then I was like kind of disappointed. Now, this is a blunder because it doesn't mate, but basically there was nothing they could do anyways here. My position is just so good, even down a piece, that it's still -7. Rook e2, I went queen b3 check, and they went rook c2. King e1 would have just lost the rook to rook b1. So rook c2, and I still went rook b1, and here my opponent is losing the queen, and they're down 2 pawns, but they have a piece up. And my opponent quickly resigned from here. Let me just show you the moves. Bishop e2, rook c1 here. Actually, I think more accurate was to go for this first, because the queen is pretty much not going anywhere. And I went knight b6, maybe slightly inaccurate. Better was to get the knight to here, but I wasn't really thinking at this point, just trying to go quickly. So here I went queen a4, keeping the pin, making sure they can't move. h4, c3, the knight has to move. Knight f3, bishop d7. I wanted to go queen b3 and here, and then if bishop d3 moved the queen, and then this would be a pin. My opponent went rook c3, and I just played rook h3, sorry, and I played rook c8, and my opponent just resigned. This position is -9, and it's really hard to actually give white a move, because I think basically any move white makes their position worse, except for maybe like h5 or something. But if you go knight e5, you have to give up this pawn, so that would be the most natural move, I think, but you don't want to give up a pawn. Now h5, which is the engine's favorite move, I could just stop you. Now what do? Now you could play maybe something like bishop d3, but after knight c4, knight a3 for example, or like knight c4, we're threatening to take this pawn too, threatening to bring the bishop here, trade pieces. It's just really unpleasant, and slowly my opponent was going to lose this game. So after rook c8, my opponent resigned. So that was the end of this pretty fun game for me, obviously. I was winning pretty much the whole time, but I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and so did my opponent. And this was pretty much my highest ever rated victory, basically, because because I've beaten a GM, but it was in a simultaneous exhibition. So if you liked the game, or you learn something from it, please remember to leave a like and subscribe. And let me know if you want to see more games from this tournament, because I'll be happy to show you them, and I did decently at it. I'll see you guys in the next one.